Hi everyone and welcome to World Class, conversations with the industry's top photographers, cinematographers, and visual artists. Access to subcultures, other worlds, and private lives can be the defining events in a documentary photographer's career, work, and life. But gaining that access is often one of the most difficult things to do. Now, Canadian-American photographer Naomi Harris has a unique gift for just that. Her photos have garnered her awards, work with the New York Times, Vice, Nat Geo, as well as many other publications. And she speaks to us today about how to form relationships with your subjects and how to stay the course on really long-term projects. She joins us today, and her little dog too, from Toronto. Thank you so much, Naomi, for joining us today. I really appreciate it. You're actually not that far away. You're only a few kilometers away here in Toronto, and which is a little funny. We should have just had you in the studio, but
I would have come down, but then you wouldn't be able to see me in my childhood home.
Yeah, exactly. So perfect opportunity. And to have the dog on the couch. What's the dog's name, by the way?
That's Maggie.
Yeah, that's Maggie. So to have Maggie on the couch there with us is a great honor.
She would have come in with me to the studio too, yeah. Though. Maggie goes everywhere with me.
She makes it onto a lot of your photographs. It's pretty impressive.
Yes, she does. It's funny. So I have a story coming out in Mary Claire, Australia, like any day now, and it was the Trumpettes, the women who love Donald Trump in Palm Beach. And the opening shot is this woman on a sofa, like a chaise lounge, I should say, out by her swimming pool. And Maggie is in the picture as well. And this is Maggie's second time making it to Mary Claire. So amazing. Not the people's dogs, my dog, but she seems to make it into lots of my shoots.
So Naomi, tell me a little bit about, I think a lot of people are really curious about how you got to where you are with your art and your career today. You do some really incredible work, not just in the documentary front, but your commercial and editorial is a very strong portfolio as well. And like, I alluded to that you do work and you have worked with a lot of high profile celebrities and politicians and things like that. So you're quite well rounded in what you do, but you do have a very strong dominant style that sort of dictates a lot of your work or has to this point.
Sure.
We'd love to hear sort of how you got from, childhood home, Naomi, to where you are today. So I'm going to let you have the floor.
I think I'm still trying to figure it out myself, to be honest. I mean, I'm always, and I think most photographers are always trying to reinvent themselves to some degree. I got my start in editorial photography, as you alluded to. And yes, I have photographed in the past a lot of celebrities. Lately, I've been focusing a lot more on personal work. And personal work often that transitions into work. This current issue of Vice is the cover story is a story I did. I drove around America for the first 100 days of the new Trump administration and made portraits and interviewed people. Now, I was going to do that work regardless, but it translated into an editorial assignment. And I think that's generally what I think a lot of photographers work that way. That it used to be I would get a call 6 p.m. on a Monday. Can you get to the airport now to go to Vegas for a shoot tomorrow? Those days are kind of gone, and maybe they are there still for some other photographers, but I don't get that as much. So I need to generate a lot more of my own work. And frankly, I'm also strongly considering getting a real job so I can just do photography as my own personal projects rather than doing editorial in order to make a living. I think part of that is just to keep enjoying actually taking pictures. And the grind eventually starts to wear you down. So I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Yeah. And so give us a sense in terms of, your path in photography and where you started. Did you go to school? And when did you decide to sort of take this path? And what about photography particularly drew you to the art form and drew you to the business, so to speak?
I would say I came late to photography. I was going to school actually at York University, just up the street. I was in the fine art program, but I was studying printmaking. And a lot of my prints actually were photo based. And this is aging me a little bit, but this was back in the day before Google existed. So if you wanted to use photos, you had to source them. So books, magazines, you would go to libraries to look for pictures of what you wanted to appropriate, if you will, but not there was no way to just type into Google and say, I want a picture of this. So I decided to, in my third year, to take a photo class. So I could, if I had an idea and I wanted to have this certain image in one of my printmaking prints, images, I wanted to know how to take the picture myself if I couldn't source it from a book or magazine. And then, so I took a class in my third year of university. I went to Europe that summer. I came back. I processed the film. I got made the contact sheets. And I was like, oh, yeah, I like this. And that was sort of how I got into photography, because it was also, for me, I'm a really chatty person, and I'm a very curious person. And I'll talk to anybody, anywhere, anytime, anyhow. And it goes over better when you actually have a camera. If you just talk to strangers, sometimes strangers are like, But if you actually, you're talking to them, oh, I'd like to take your picture, and you're more flattering that way. I find it's my way into talking to people I wouldn't normally or ordinarily talk to. And so that's kind of how I got into it. And fourth year university, school's wrapping up. I don't know what I'm going to do come graduation. And I had gone to visit the International Center of Photography in New York, saw that they had a one-year documentary photography program, and decided to apply. And it was very last minute. And one of the things you had to have a portfolio. Okay, I have some pictures. And one of the things they wanted for the portfolio was a long-term project or some form of project. And I'd never done one of those. It wasn't in my vocabulary at that point. And I went to the local kosher butcher shop and spent an afternoon there and took pictures of the butchers, of them koshering the meat and stuff. And that's what I submitted. And I found out on my 24th birthday, I got the letter in the mail that I was accepted, and I was going to New York, and that's how it all started.
Wow. And was there something in that particular schooling with that program that influenced the work that was to come, or was that already growing in you? Was that already part of your character and your reason for becoming a photographer? Like how?
Yeah, interesting that you would say that. I mean, I spent the first 2/3 of the program wondering, what the hell am I doing here? Felt really uncomfortable, really like a fish out of water. The other students, we were all roughly the same age. I was 24 at the time. There were some people who were younger, some people who were older. But, going around the first day of class, people would be like, I got my first camera at age 8. Yeah. Or, my father was a photographer, and I would go in the dark room with him ever since I could walk. And I'm just like, yeah, I started taking pictures last year. Yeah. And then like we had a history of photography class, and people would be throwing names out, and I'm like, Annie Leibovitz. Like that's the only person I knew. And it was kind of like, it was my first time, because when I went to university, I lived at home. It was my first time moving away from home, going to New York City. Toronto was a decent sized city, but going from Toronto to New York, and all of a sudden being really not out of my element, in the sense that I was uncomfortable by the other people, but I just felt like I bit off more than I could chew. I didn't have the same knowledge that they had. I didn't come from the same background as far as experience. And also, I don't really like darkroom printing, and that's what a lot of the classes were. And then we had an assignment in the last session, in the last, I guess we had trimesters, because I think it was three periods of the year. And in the last session, we had an assignment to do landscape photography, and I don't know from landscape photography. And I decided I would go to Coney Island, because I'd never been down there. And I went to Coney Island. I'm walking around, and started hearing this weird pinging sound, and it was people playing handball on the beach. There was this handball court, and I got closer, and then I saw these like old guys playing handball. I'm like, oh, great. Okay. So I got closer. And then I forgot all about the landscape assignment and I started talking to them and photographing them. And that was like my first real quote unquote long-term project. I would every weekend, every day I didn't have classes and the weather was nice, I would head down to Coney Island and photograph these guys and hang out with these guys. And so that's kind of what started it all.
And I understand one of your first big projects was the, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but Haddon Hall?
Yep, that's correct.
So tell us a little bit about that project, because I think it is a project that for you really started what was to come.
Yeah, it's still in some ways my first project, my first love, maybe in some ways my favorite project, because it was also at a time when you have so much time or you can dedicate time. So I had really wanted to do a project about Holocaust survivors and in a non-traditional way. The most projects you'd see on Holocaust survivors, it would be black and white with people with their head in their hands and very, tattoos and very morose and dark. And I wanted to celebrate it more, not celebrate that you were in the concentration camps, but celebrate that you were a survivor. And the idea that you made it, you established a life, you had your own family, you have your own kids, grandchildren now. And I had gone down to Miami to sort of source that out. And on my last day in Miami, I found this little hotel that all these people were, they were dancing in the foyer. And I went in and discovered that most of the people either lived in the hotel or were snowbirds and they would come down and spend the winters there. So I was leaving the next day, but then I decided, there on the spot, I would come back the following year and spend a couple of months living in the hotel and photographing in the hotel. And that's what I did. And that was my first project. And it was from that work that I got my first assignment with Kathy Ryan at the New York Times Magazine. And in fact, it's almost 20 years anniversary. Like I started in December 1999. So that's going to be not my next book, but the book after I'm going to publish finally after 20 years, Haddon Hall.
Well, that's incredible. And one of the questions that sort of really intrigues me is that the theme throughout your work is that you get in with subgroups of people, or you get in with people that sometimes don't always get a lot of limelight or attention, and you're able to sort of infiltrate them and infiltrate them over a long period of time. Two things that I think a lot of photographers really struggle with. I know myself, just doing personal street photography or any sort of documentary photography, that I consider myself a chatty person and I consider myself a friendly person. But when it comes down to putting a camera up in somebody's face, I'm afraid that they're always going to like punch me, or like, without, like it's this question of like, I'm invading your space.
Right.
And so many street photographers, and I know that's not necessarily what you do, but they are almost fearless. They know that most 9 times out of 10, no one's going to say anything. Most of the time they give a wave or it's an opportunity to have a conversation.
Right. I think the difference between street photographers, if I can interrupt, is we approach things differently. I have a friend who I didn't know, well, we were living in Toronto. She lives in LA now, Michelle Grosskopf, and she's a marvelous street photographer. And I've been with her a couple of times watching her in action, and she is like a hunter. The way she poaches her, like she sees something she likes and she chases them and goes after them. And it's no holds barred. Whereas I'm much more subdued. I strike up conversation first. I'm a little more chatty. I very seldom, because also I shoot differently. I'm often using medium format and I have to set up lights. I'd like to change that a little bit so I could be a little bit more fluid and I used to be that way when I shot 35 millimeter back in the day. But, when you move to medium format, it's a little bit more set up. But I would say that the approach is different. And whereas a street photographer may chat up the person, it's often just get the picture and go. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it's just, for me, it's more about actually establishing a connection and sometimes a relationship. But, I want to feel like the other person is getting something from this interaction as well.
Right.
And I think often they are. I mean, I think back to this project I just completed, the first 100 days project, and I think of some of the people that I spent time with. And I mean, except with the exception of one woman, I spent an hour plus with each person. And that may not seem like a lot of time, but when you're driving around and you see someone, you stop and you want to photograph them, but then you have to keep going because you have to get to the next place, you know, the nature of road trip projects. Yeah, that can be a long time.
And so you do some teaching as well, correct? In New
I'd like to
York?
do more. Yeah.
And so, imagine, you've got your student, and your student is, fairly inexperienced, and they want to know, what do you say? What, when you're going out there and you're meeting somebody for the first time on the street or in a building, and you want to have a conversation, you want to photograph them. What's the mood? What's the approach? How do you get in with those people? What do you say to your students?
I think this is something you can't teach. It's innate. It comes from within you. I think it's about listening as well. Like I've watched some other photographers, and you can tell that there's zero connection. They're just like, yeah, and they're kind of going through the motions of talking to the person, but they're just getting what they want. And they're, I may sit and like, perfect example, like when I lived at Haddon Hall and I photographed at Haddon Hall, I also took the people to doctor's appointments and hairdressers and did grocery shopping with them, not bringing the camera every time. Often I would just come as a friend. And I think that's, I mean, you can kind of try to teach this to people, but I think a lot of it is just, it's your character, it's your personal makeup, and it's what you are and who you are. And I think in general, all I can say and all I could try to teach people is try to be empathetic, try to be sympathetic, try not to. I mean, there's been situations where I'm watching a scenario and I'm like, this would make a beautiful photo, because there's a lot of emotion or something, but the person's also clearly in pain or something. So it feels better to like actually go and give the person a hug than to take their photo. But I'm okay with that. It depends on what you want at the end of the day. I don't necessarily feel I have to take every picture out there. Sometimes it's better to just be a human being, a mensch to someone else.
Yeah. And is it that is being a photographer and stating that you're a photographer one of the first things that's comes out of your mouth, or do you just say, hey, my name is Naomi, I really like this this building you're in, what are you guys doing, I'm really curious? Or
it all depends. Yeah, it depends on what I'm doing. I'll tell you, especially when I'm road tripping, when I go on, so I met that one on, I did a road trip across Canada in 2011, and I gave a hitchhiker a lift home in Saskatchewan, and I left with a dog. I wasn't planning on keeping her. I was driving to Kandahar, Canada, because I know that I'm never going to go to Kandahar, Afghanistan. And I was driving on a dirt road, and there was this man, and I drove by him, and I looked back in my rearview mirror, and he's like, oh, he had headphones on, and he was like signaling. And it was a hot day in July, probably like 30 degrees Celsius, a Saturday. Hadn't seen another car in a really long time. And I knew there was an Indian reservation or up the road, and I knew that's where he was going back home to. So I have never given a hitchhiker a lift home before, but I backed up. I picked him up because I knew where he was going. And he's like, you can just drop me off at the end of the road, whatever. And I'm like, no, I don't mind taking you home. I'll take you home. And in fact, I am a photographer. May I take a portrait of, like, he was telling me that he lives with his family, and that his parents were in his house, and his sisters, and a whole big crowd. And I said, may I take a family portrait? And he's like, yeah, that'd be fine. Great. And when I was there waiting for his parents to come home, they were on their way to the Calgary Stampede. So they had gone to pick up some provisions, I guess. I was standing and talking to his 10-year-old sister, and this wretched creature, I saw it like beelining from, way off yonder. and it came straight towards us. And when it arrived, the little girl kicked it. And I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, oh, it's a res dog. It doesn't matter. And I'm like, it matters. And my intention was not to keep it, but to show this kid, hey, this dog's actually a really gentle creature under all this dirty fur, blah, blah, blah. So we gave it a haircut and a bath, and everyone was like, oh, it's so cute. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to take it to the Humane Society, not expecting to keep it. But, you know, when you have this little thing like staring at you, thank you, thank you, thank you for like 3 days, whatever. And then on top of it, she was pregnant. So I had to leave her in Winnipeg, and people had to, it was a long story. But now when I take road trips, she comes with me on every road trip. I sleep in Walmart parking lots. I would never do that without a dog. She's my bodyguard in ways. But long-winded way back to your question, I have to stop and walk her every day. Like, you know, she doesn't want to just go around the block. She wants to go for an hour hike. So we often go to parks. Like, it's a really great icebreaker because I can talk to someone and be like, hey, do you know where there's any good dog parks? And they'll start telling me about different places. And either that person could be a potential subject for me as we start talking animals, or when I actually go to the park, the number of times I've met people on my walk with her. And like when you see her little face, you how do you say no? So they may want to say no to me, but they don't want to say no to her.
So the secret really is just having a pet. That seems to be the real icebreaker.
I don't want to say that because that's my card up my sleeve. But yeah, I'd say in addition to the company that the animal offers you, but also the sense that it slows you down, it makes you take better care of yourself, I think, because you have to have a little bit more of a rhythm and a little bit more of a schedule. Right. Even in my day-to-day life when I'm not off photographing, I could be working at the computer and all of a sudden this thing's scratching at my leg because she wants to go out. She's bored. She needs a break, and it gives me a break. And then I come back and I'm much clearer.
When we talk about traveling across America and traveling across Canada, as you've done now, is there, how much pre-production goes into those types of projects? You literally just walk out the door.
I always intend to prepare, and then it's like the travel day comes and I'm still packing the car up and I'm just like, where am I going? And I pick that spot and I go there first. Right. Yeah, I don't, and maybe that's a flaw. I kind of prefer to let happenstance occur. Right.
And so how do you select your subjects? So the subjects that you did for the O Canada series and the subjects that that you've done for pretty much all of them, like the first 100 days, how many of those, how do you, were all those dog introductions? Is that how that worked? Or
in Canada, I didn't have a dog. So when I did the road trip across Canada, I did not have Maggie. I mean, part of it's luck, being open to chance and what's around you. Funny story, when I was doing the Canada trip, I was in BC and I really wanted, and also like having a little checklist. Like I try not to have too much of preconceived notions, but I knew like, okay, I'm going to photograph Canada. What's something that's super Canadian? Tree planters. I never did it when I was young, but I know a lot of people, it's a kind of a rite of passage for a lot of people. And I've been trying to reach a few different companies, and I'm in, I don't even know where I was, like Merrick or something, BC. And I was in this little internet cafe and I'm on the phone and I had reached out to someone and the person called me and he's talking, like, we're having this conversation and I hear him in my phone, but then I also hear the same conversation happening directly behind me. And I turn around and the guy's like literally in the same cafe. And so after that, he was like, because we were just talking about the potential. And then when he saw that I was there and it was very funny and whatever, he's like, all right, yeah, you can come on out. So I think so much of it is situations like that. And sometimes though, like I wanted to photograph the oldest Canadian who was 112 at that time. Her name was Pearl Let's Go. That's actually the day after I found Maggie. I photographed her. That's why I was in Saskatchewan in that area. And so certain things like I would go out and schedule and try to get in touch with people, or if I knew that the Spock Days convention was happening, you know, I would make sure I was in Vulcan, Alberta on the date that it happened. But most of the time, I really just let opportunity happen. And then, like, you could be in a cafe or somewhere and you start talking to someone. They're like, oh, did you know there's this town up the road? You know, and it's just a lot of it's intuition also.
Mm,
And
right.
just being open to it, like doing some research, and maybe I could do more research. I don't know, but for me, I don't like to overplan.
Mm,
At least not like not my trips. Other things I overplan, but
right.
not my trips.
Right. So let's, before we get ahead of ourselves here, I really wanted to spend some time talking about EUSA, and then we can pick up this thread again because I think there's some great opportunities to talk about not just access and planning or not planning, and then long-term projects as well through this particular project of yours. So I want, if you can describe the project to us, sort
Sure.
of what it is, how it came about, that'd be great.
Sure. So EUSA is kind of my look at how our cultures have become so homogenized, and I think as a direct result of globalization. It doesn't matter where you live in the world anymore. We all wear the same jeans. We all talk on the same phones. At this point, I mean, I can remember the first time I had sushi. My friends' kids eat sushi all the time. Like, you know, we are so interconnected.
Yeah, but
And so,
The Europeans aren't eating peanut butter yet. So
really,
we still have some long way to go. Yeah.
maybe they know something we don't know. Maybe it's not good for us.
They're wrong. Peanut
They're-
butter and almond butter is
but
incredible. I have no idea why they don't eat it, but
but
anyways,
the Dutch do put sprinkles on their
I know.
toast.
Well,
So
that's because that's also delicious. Maybe not good for you, but it's
not
delicious.
nutritious,
Yeah.
but
Continue.
um,
Sorry.
yeah, we digress. I'd say so. So basically, I photographed European themed places in America and American themed places in Europe. So, um, Wild West theme parks, a lot of that kind of cowboy and Indian thing, sort of the pioneer days, fur trappers in Sweden and in America. So it all actually started out, and it's kind of funny because so many of my projects, one thing leads to another, leads to another. Like when I was living in Miami and photographing Haddon Hall, on my days off, I would go to a nude beach. And I'd hear people talking about, oh, did you go to that party? Oh, were you going to that party? And I'm like, what party are they talking about? And why doesn't anyone invite me? Only to find out that they're talking about swinger parties. And I was moving back to New York. I've been in Miami for a couple of months. And one of my beach friends, I always sat with the same crew of people. One of my beach friends said to me, I know you're not into this probably, but you're a photographer. I think you'll find this very interesting. As a single man, I can't go to a swinger party by myself. Will you come with me? And I was his key. And that led to me discovering the world of swinging, and I was fascinated by it. And so I did my book, America Swings. The last shoot I was on for America Swings happened to be in the northern part of Georgia in the mountains, and that was the very last party I attended. Um, I had several hours to kill before the festivities were going to kick off, and the organizers were like, "You should go check out Helen." I'm like, "What's Helen?" They're like, "Just go. It's a cute little town. Just, you know." I'm like, "All right. I have nothing else to do," so I drove to Helen, and I don't even think there's a stoplight. I think there's a four-way stop. It's a teeny tiny little town, and I think it used to be either a silver mining town or maybe forestry. I can't remember what their industry was, but back in like the 70s, their main industry was shutting down. And I picture it like Jaws, when they're having the discussion, like, what are we going to do with the shark? And then, you know, the guy comes and scratches his nails on the board, and it's like, we're going to get it, you know, the boat, we're going to get the shark. I figure that's what they're having their town meeting, and what are we going to do? And this guy's like, I was in Europe. I fought in World War II. I was in Switzerland. We're going to throw up a bunch of gingerbread on the buildings, and we're going to turn it into a Bavarian theme town. And that's what they did. And it's now boasts the longest Oktoberfest. I think it starts in like August and runs till November or something
Wow.
ridiculous like that. And it's a great little theme town that's got like cuckoo clock shops and stuff. No one's German there or Swiss, but they've created this. And so being there, I got back to my hotel room or my motel room, and I Googled like other European places in America. And found Frankenmuth, Michigan, Orange City, Iowa, Solvang, California. I'm like, oh wow, so there's really a lot of places that exist that have this sort of European feel. What's going on? And because like I could have stopped it at that, but I'm really, a lot of my projects, I come up with the name before I come up with the project. I don't know why. It's just a wordplay thing. And I was like, it was also at the time that the euro had just surpassed the value of the US dollar. It was getting really strong. And so EU was in the news a lot. So I was like, EU, USA, like trying this blending of both words. So after I had established that there were all these American places, I then was like, wouldn't it be interesting if there were American themed places in Europe? And I started doing a little research and found this place called High Chaparral in Sweden that had an American weekend. And what it was like a 4-day rendezvous where people would come and camp and dress as Indians or fur trappers or Civil War soldiers. And that was the first shoot that I went. It was actually in June. It was around the summer solstice, June 2008. Ooh, that's a while ago already. But that kind of got the ball rolling. And from there, I discovered other places like in Italy and France. And, you know, some of them were more hokey, like, you know, just really tacky amusement parks. And some of them were really amazing, like going to the Czech Republic and going to a faux battle where it was like, it wasn't, I mean, they had recreated certain battles like Custer's Last Stand and stuff, but the year I went, they just made it up entirely. So it was like natives against Civil War soldiers, but it wasn't based on anything.
Right.
But what's fascinating is these people, a lot of them in Europe, don't speak a lick of English, but their knowledge of American history is so strong. And I'd say it's much stronger than the vice versa. Like in the US, most of the places, it was either Oktoberfest or so beer, or it would be like a Dutch festival, and the people of that town would have Dutch heritage, and that's why they're celebrating it. Same Solvang in California is a Danish town, or Frankenmuth, Michigan is German. And so for the Americans, it's much more about culture, like, and it's their own heritage and culture.
Mm-hmm. And were North Americans in general surprised to find that there were American-themed parks in Europe?
Well, I haven't shown the work that much yet, but when I do show it, yeah, they're pretty surprised. I think a lot of people are also really surprised to see Europeans dressed like Native Americans, especially since here it's so taboo and such a no-no. Like every year, though, you still have a Coachella story where some some girls put on a headdress thinking she's so cute, which, you know, rightfully so. But over there, it's done different. It's not because they're trying to be sexy and cute or whatever. And I would meet people who would say, the Indian is, and I know you don't use the word Indian, but this is Europeans. They still call them Indians, and they would say they are the superior race. Like they wanted to be native, not knowing the backstory and the history all the time. But they did really believe in what they were doing, and to dress up as them and camp as them. They felt it was a form of honor. They weren't trying to mock or ridicule them.
Right. And so let's talk about your experience in sort of getting access to this wide group of people, the strategies that you used in order to get in, and then how you were able to present yourself with your camera in such a way that allowed them to be free, right? There's a lot of people, a lot of very different cultures that you have to navigate, different languages. What was your strategy?
I would say with this project, it was probably, with the EUSA, it was probably the project that I had the least to do with people, in the sense that people are already in costume, and it was just super easy let me rephrase that, but super easy in the sense that, like, you look wonderful. I love what you're wearing. May I take your picture? Okay. Like I didn't have to work too hard on people because they knew that they looked good. They purposely put the effort in to dress up and look good. And other people were photographing them, usually more with, you know, their phone or whatever, but they were that no one had an issue of being photographed. They wanted to be photographed. And then I was shooting for this project with a Mamiya C330, so wastefinder twin lens camera. So that added another layer of, if you will, respect, or like, oh wow. And some people would be like, I haven't seen a camera like that in ages. Or you would get people who are like, what's film? Like, that had literally never seen film because they were of such an age. So that was super interesting. And then if, especially if I'm in the middle of photographing them and then the roll of film runs out and I have to, oh, hold on, and you open the, and then you have to put the new roll of film in. And it just commanded a little bit more respect, I think.
Yeah.
And then I also,
I don't want to interject here, but I want to sort of add to that and ask,
sure.
Do you find, and I've heard this from other photographers, do you find that shooting film gains you more respect as well because people can't see the photo? They're so used now, like, oh, let me see, can I see the photo? And you're like, sorry, you can't see, you just have to trust me, right?
Yeah, definitely there's something to say about that. And the fact that I'm not just like willy-nilly taking tons of photos, like, I'm directing them and waiting till, oh, can you move this way? Can you move that way? Rather than just shooting a bunch, I'm much slower in my process. And I think that sort of lends some patience to it. I also, for the most part, have strobes with me. I'm shooting with Q flashes. And so, picture me, I'm always by myself. I don't really shoot with assistants when I'm doing personal work. And I've got the camera around my neck and a fanny pack on because I've got, like, it's actually a tool belt, but I've got all my film in it. And then I've got like 2 light stands and I'm just like, I'm walking around these events, and that's why I've got these big pipes, right? And just, when you see this poor woman hobbling around with these 2 light stands and the camera around her neck weighing her down, I think people are sort of like, okay, she's the real deal, as opposed to like someone with, a DSLR and a really long lens. And,
right.
So I think, and then, in America, there weren't as many opportunities to photograph people because less people dressed up. In Europe, people were definitely got more into it and were really, and though it was definitely richer in subject matter. A lot of the places I went, people didn't speak, like I said, a lot of people didn't speak any English. And I'm really bad. I don't speak French. I speak English. And, but I was still able to communicate through the camera, like, can I take your picture? And I think people were able to understand what I was doing. So they were okay with it. But yeah, that said, I wasn't able to ask them, so tell me, why are you fascinated by the Civil War? Do you have American family? Like, I wasn't able to have those conversations. So it's, for me, this project is actually a little bit more superficial, if you will, because I usually really do dig deeper, but it was more just about the image.
Yeah. And to take a bit of a non sequitur here, when you look at your other work where you do get more intimate with people, like the first 100 days or Canada, where you actually are talking to that individual for a longer time, do you get to know them a lot first and find out their story before you photograph? Or is it during that process you get to find out about more of them? Or is it after? Where does that come in?
I mean, it varies. Sometimes I like what someone's doing and I'll photograph them first. Other times it's like, we'll hang out and chat and then I'll be like, hey, do you mind if I take your picture now? It's case by case. It also depends on if I think they are like going to have to run or something. So I want to make sure that I get the picture. And if I don't have as deep a conversation, well, that's okay too. But it is definitely a case by case basis. Sometimes I feel they need to have the conversation to relax them. Warm them up to me in the scenario. It all depends.
So let's go into talking about how you manage longer term projects. The first question that comes to mind for me is, how do you pay for these projects?
Good question.
Like, how do you...
So in the past, I generally self-fund. In the past, like Haddon Hall, I was working as a freelance photo editing in New York. And it's funny, I had actually just been offered the position as assistant photo editor at Esquire. And I'm like, I think I want to go to Florida and try this out. And sometimes I say to myself, Self, had you done that, maybe you'd be the director of photography somewhere today.
Yeah.
Instead of sleeping in Walmarts.
Yeah.
But that's okay. Sliding doors, you take
Yeah.
your path choices. So that project I self-funded. I'd saved up money, and I lived at the hotel, film process, all that stuff I paid myself. Okay. When I started the Swingers project, that was when I probably should have been wiser, because I would stick everything on a credit card. Flights, hotels, film processing. And then all of a sudden I realized, oh my gosh, I'm 20 something $1,000 in debt from working on this project. Managed to pay it off. So now I only do projects if I have the money. So with O Canada, for example, I received a Canada Council grant. So that afforded me to buy my car on eBay. And but that just put while it was a sizable grant, a nice grant, it just was a dent. And I was able to there was a magazine called Zoomer, which is kind of the Canadian version of AARP magazine. It's people, well, they're saying Zoomers are 45 years and up, which means next year I'm technically a Zoomer. Yeah. But it's like, it's baby boomers with zip, I guess. Yeah. And so they did 4 portfolios. So I was able to, with the grant money and then the money I was being paid by Zoomer, to pay for the trip. And so I didn't go into hawk at all. Yeah. EUSA, I started it off as a personal project. And that said, after I had visited in 2010, I had gone to 29 in 2010, I had gone to Solvang. Oh, no, I did process that. In 2010, I went to the Canary Islands and Germany and the Czech Republic. And I got back and I had almost 60 rolls of film. And I stuck it in the freezer because I didn't have the money to process it. And it sat in the freezer for 3 years until a friend of mine who worked at a lab was quitting her job and was like, have your mom send the film to me. Wow. And I'll process it for you for free, saving me, over $1,000. So I got smart in the sense that and that's why it took me a while to finish the project, because I was never, after going into hawk for, going into debt with America Swings, even though I did publish a book and stuff like that, which was great. I just said to myself, I will never go into debt for a project again. So the way I justified it, but a lot of times I do put the projects on a credit card, or in the past, and then I'd have to worry about that. And then I really don't suggest that to other photographers, right, unless you know you have a windfall coming later on. Right. But also grant money is, for me, extremely helpful. I just received my 3rd Canada Council grant. Thank you, Canada Council. And I have a project I'm going to be working on next year, which is also going to be a big departure. It's going to involve a 10-week-long canoe trip and self-portraits, but that'll be something completely different for me. But yeah, I do suggest either working at another job, saving the money, putting it aside, and then working on a project. Credit cards don't pay for themselves. So, you have to figure out how you're going to pay it off if you're going to do it that way. Right,
exactly. And being that you are effectively a dual citizen, and you spend a lot of your time in the United States, do you also have access to American grants? Or is it more?
Sure, but there's not as many American grants. Yeah. Canada's really decent, and apparently Quebec is the best province to live in, because their provincial grants are huge. But yeah, we kind of moan and complain in Canada about the arts, and definitely under Harper there was a lot of cutbacks, but under Trudeau, the arts are back.
I see he's good looking and he's giving back to the artists, right? Look at this. We can't lose.
Well, it's funny because in some ways, there are definitely a lot of people who don't agree with that, and but I think the arts really help a civilization. I think we need the arts, and if you look at other countries that do fund a lot of, and when I say arts, I don't just mean the visual arts. I mean dance, music, theater, all of that. It enriches a society.
And so, kind of closing the loop on long-term projects, if somebody wants to get into doing a long-term project, what are some of your advice points in terms of being persistent, staying on topic, staying on point, long-term strategies just for managing a project like this, and the expectations, setting deadlines, those types of things? What's your advice?
The advice I give, I never take myself. So for one thing, I would say it's great to do a project that's in your own neighborhood or where you live. Me personally, I always pick these projects that have tremendous amounts of travel. And so most of my money is going to the airlines and hotels. Right. So that would be one thing, is to try to pick something local. Maybe I'll try that sometime. I think it's also super important to pick something that you find interesting and fascinating. And for me, when I pick a project, it's more that I want to learn about the subject. Yes, I wanted to, and I do pick a lot of projects that are about popular culture, and I'm trying to keep a finger on the pulse of what's going on in our society. But at the same time, I think it's really important that it's not just like, oh, okay, this is something cool and this is a fad and I'm going to photograph this. And then after spending a few visits on, photographing or whatever, a few outings, and you're like, this is really boring, or I'm not that interested. It's, first of all, I would say, and I've done this before, where you think you're going to go down a path and shoot something, and then you're like, I really don't have that much interest in this anymore. It's okay to abandon things. I mean, also sometimes just stick it out. It might get better. You have to give yourself that sort of grace period. But I think it's really important to pick something that is going to hold your interest for a long period of time.
Why is that so important for you to find long-term projects? Why don't you just do shorter projects? Like, what's the value in it?
I think part of it is just like the fact that time does, for, like I said, I want to learn something. And the fact is, I do, like with EUSA, I was going all over Europe, all over America in a short period of time, because most of these events only occur in the summertime. So I can't be at two places at once. So that's part of why it took so long. I think if you can afford the time and bang a project out in a couple of weeks, then that's awesome. But also, I think most projects I've seen that have been done, executed in a short period of time, it looks like it. I think spending more time on something allows you to find your voice and allows you to really gain insight into the subjects. Right. That's not to say that you can't ever come up with an idea, pick an idea, and have a studio and in a short period of time have a lot of people. It all varies on the project. I'm not going to say that you have to spend 5 years on a project and that's when it's done. Right. I think you asked earlier, how do you know when a project's done? Again, I don't think it's something that you can tell by a calendar and okay, I've dedicated 2 years of my life to this. Check, we're done. I think it really is a gut feeling when you feel you have enough material to share. I also think it depends on what is your final goal with this project. Is it exhibition? Is it a book? Because what may look great on the walls of a gallery doesn't necessarily translate well to books. And I think that's really important, is to have in mind. And sometimes it's actually even better, and I'm going to do this with my next projects, is to have a designer on board ahead of time to show them what you have, because sometimes you think you've done a great job and you've got all these pictures, and then when you're starting to look at it in a more linear book format, you're like, oh wow, I have tons of portraits, I don't have any landscape or like settings. And I think these are things that are important to like sometimes stop, take a breath, have another set of eyes look at what you're doing, and to help you realize like, okay, great, you've got this cover, this side of things. Maybe you need to get those details and other aspects before you can say the project's finished.
Right. And I don't mean to sound sycophantic in any way, but one of the things that really draws me to your work is that regardless of whether you're doing a long-term documentary project or you're doing an editorial or commercial work, as we see, as people can see on your website, there thematically, it's not like that the photos all look the same. They don't, but they all feel the same. There's a weight to them that an air to them that feel like they came from the same photographer. So it makes me wonder, you spend, a day with William Shatner, and it looks like the same as you've spent, months, traveling across the U.S. or that kind of thing. Do your long-term projects end up molding some of your day-to-day style? Is there, or how does that all come about?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's really important that a photographer has a look, has a style. But at the same time, I think it's really important that a photographer grows. Like I can think of certain photographers, and often very successful photographers, but like, and there's something great like, oh yeah, it's a blah, blah, blah photo right off the bat. But then I often am like, oh God, it's like insert subject here, where it's always this formula. And I frankly find it boring. I'd rather, but then again, I consider myself a environmental portraitist, in the sense that to me the location is equally as important as the subject. Whereas like when you shoot in a studio, it is, I guess, very formulaic, and then you're just inserting a different subject in. Right. But that's just the way, because to me, I think the actual surroundings is often, I know she's
the best. Stretching. I can't take my eye off her. She's hysterical.
I'm surprised that she hasn't come and scratched my leg to make me give me more. Yeah. In any event, where was I? I do definitely think it's important to have a style, and I guess in some ways I have a way I photograph, but I do like that is the same for every shoot, but it changes on every shoot dictates me doing something different. And I don't know if I can quite articulate it or put my finger down on it, but I think it's part of your personality comes through the pictures. I think something that even when the subject's not necessarily a funny subject, I think there's always a bit of humor infused in my pictures. Maybe a little tongue-in-cheek humor. Maybe they're not always truly funny scenarios, but and I'm not trying to be like yucking it up either, like with like cliches. It's just kind of there.
Right. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I want to ask a question that I hope to ask, further photographers that I speak with on this series. But it's something that just kind of came about the other day, which I'm going through Instagram, and my Instagram feed is, photographers that really inspire me, and some that challenge me, some that I maybe don't like their photography, but it challenges me to be different. And as you kind of scroll through, and we're so inundated with images now that I've sort of lost sight of what a good photograph is, because I see so much good photography. I'm like, I don't even know what's good anymore. Like, is that good? And so when you think about it, how do you define what a good photograph is?
Yeah, that is tough. I mean, for me, I can appreciate certain pictures, like various landscapey type images that I'm like, yeah, that's a beautiful picture. Doesn't do nothing for me. Like, because that's just not the way my mind works. I'm much more about people. And I want to feel a connection with the people. And sometimes it's not necessarily about the technique. It's more about maybe who you're photographing is what And if I feel like the photographer has made a connection with the subject,
Mm,
maybe that's what stirs me.
right.
Uh, but yeah, that's tough because you're right. You do see a lot of images, and sometimes I like frivolous pictures that are just really nice on the color palette and composition, and it's really actually quite fluffy. And
Yeah.
but it depends on why am I just liking it because it makes me it evokes a nice feeling in me.
Right.
Um, yeah, that's fair too.
Yeah.
But I think I kind of lean more towards stuff that's funny
Yeah.
and definitely feels more like there's a connection between the
Right.
subject and photographer,
Right. Yeah.
but not necessarily straight up portraiture
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that, like the person sitting for you,
Yeah.
but that there is some, like I think of Winogrand, and
Yeah.
you know doesn't get much better than that, right? Because he's got all of the checks. He's got funny, he's got quirky, like it, and there is, even though he may be walking by someone and never see them again, for that moment there's a connection
Right.
because they usually are aware that he's there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So let's talk really briefly about what you have coming up. We spoke off sort of offline about this idea that you are changing a little bit about what your photography is going to
Sure.
be doing, and curious to see what that change is going to be. So tell us a little bit about what you're planning.
Yeah, I'm curious too. Let's hope I can do it. So when I started EUSA in 2008, I was shooting it on this Mamiya C330. I had just started shooting digital, and so it was still very natural to shoot with film. And I did find, though, from the when I started shooting the project to when I ended, definitely a change in society, because so many of the events I went to were rendezvous and reenactments. It meant leave your electronics in your car.
Mm.
So I was able to still photograph people doing things, being aware, or just being present. Whereas I find lately when I'm doing assignment work, I had a story last year. It was in Florida, and it was so hard to make a photo of just like, you're like, oh, that's cute. Those are some girls on the beach making a selfie in their bathing suits. And then you're like, oh my God, everyone's doing that. So, you either get these pictures of people like this or like this. And it's just so seldom to see and rare to get those off moments where someone's just kind of being,
Mm.
not even doing anything, just being there, being bored, being, caught up in their own daydreaming. And I just thought to myself, if this is the nature of documentary photography now, that all it is photographing people on their GD phones,
Mm.
I don't want to be part of that.
Yeah.
It's going to get boring really quickly.
Yeah.
So I have a couple of projects. One I'm hoping to do in the upcoming, like January, February, if all goes well financially, of course, because I have the ideas. It's just the money to execute it. Um, I have trying to do a project called Always a Bridesmaid. I've already gone and done the solo wedding portion of it, where I married myself in Japan a couple of years ago. The next portion of the project is I'm going to set up a pop-up photo studio in Las Vegas and be the maid of honor to hopefully 100 random couples. Um, you know, all walks of life,
Right.
young, old. Um, and then the next big project, that the reason I got the Canada Council New Chapter grant, is a project I call, well, I don't really have a title for it yet, but it'll be a 10-week long canoe trip where I am going to dress up like the painter. So there was this painter, Frances Ann Hopkins, in the 1860s, who accompanied her husband, who was a bigwig with the Hudson Bay Company, and she went with him on some of the tours. Well, it's not tours, but they were going to go pick up the furs to take back to Europe. And I just found it fascinating. Like, so her paintings, she would come with, and she would make sketches and then make these large scale oil paintings. And What's fascinating is if you think about women in the 1800s and the 1860s, your opportunities in life, you were either married and a mother and a wife, or you were a spinster and worked as the teacher or a nurse or whatever. Women didn't go on long-term canoe treks, you know? And in her case, being married afforded her the access and the ability to go with this large group of men, essentially into the wilderness of Canada. I am further exploring the fact that at age 44, still single, never been married, not going to be a mother. And I guess that's partially why I'm doing the Always a Bridesmaid project. And then also this idea of if I was married and a mother, I don't think I'd be able to take the time off to do a massive canoe trip like this. So I'm kind of taking the inspiration from Frances Anne, but applying it to today. And I'm also going to go dressed as her and try to recreate the same spots that she made the sketches. And we'll see what happens, but it'll be fun, I hope.
Wow.
It'll either be amazing or a big disaster. We'll see.
And you sort of addressed this with your answer in terms of like what drew you to move to more performance art and self-portraiture. But if there's any additional information that you could provide in terms of what you believe performance art and having you as the subject, turning the camera on yourself, what that provides you and your audience that shooting others does not provide.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is access. I'm always there. Not going anywhere. I hope. So there's that. I also look at other photographers or artists who do self-portraiture, and typically it's about their lives. And in my case, I think my life is very boring. I go to bed at 9:30. I have a dog. I don't really, I think whereas other people will say, oh, you're so interesting, you do such interesting things. Yeah, I photograph interesting people. I go and watch other interesting people. Me, myself, personally, I think I'm pretty square and vanilla and not that exciting in my own right. So I think in my own ideas of doing self-portraiture, it's more of me emulating someone else or a form of performance. Because if I was to just turn the camera on my day-to-day life, no one would want to watch it. At least I
think a lot of people feel that way. Yeah, but I empathize for sure. Absolutely. Before we close it out, I just want to open it up and ask, is there anything that you want to provide in terms of some insights or advice to people who are really drawn to your work and want to maybe follow that path and emulate the style of work that you've done, or are inspired by it? What's your advice to them?
It's interesting. Like if I was to talk to 24, 25-year-old Naomi, I would probably say do something else and make photography a second part of your life. Well, no, let's not put that in. That's not good. I mean, but the idea, honestly, like, I think it's about finding balance. And I have definitely sacrificed a lot of things in my life in terms of relationships, friendships. Work has always come first to me. And I don't know if it was worth it at the end. And, I hopefully still have quite a few years left to go, both in terms of relationships with people and in terms of making my own work. But I think it's important to find a balance in life in general. I also think it's important to start saving when you're young and not, it's cute to live like this vagabond photographer's life when you're in your 20s and your 30s. When you're in your 40s, it's starting not to be so cute anymore.
Right.
So I think, it's okay to go off and do stints of it, but I think it's important to, especially as our culture and our society is changing so much, like our parents' generation, they're going to get Social Security. But by the time I come around to that age, probably not. So I have to be a little bit more conscientious about what my future is. Yeah. But then again, every time I think I'm going to hang up the camera, I get another grant or something, and a new project comes and lures me back in. It's addicting, I guess, photography. Yeah. Maybe I should give up photography and move on to heroin. I don't know. But yeah, it's I don't know if that's a good answer, but
probably I think it's great. I think you've provided, I think, a lot of really great insights. When we see projects like the projects that you do, there's always a lot of questions. We are flipping through a magazine or through a book. We're like, how did they get that shot? How did they find that person? How did they make that introduction? And I think that your value as a photographer in terms of this conversation is really gives us a great insight into that it is possible, and really what you're really looking for is just making human connections. And I think human connections are the basis of humanity. We're all doing that in our day-to-day lives, regardless of our art, regardless of our culture, or regardless of anything.
I think at the end of the day also, it's just about what's the worst that can happen. You go up to someone and you say, may I take your photo? And this has happened to me too. Like, no, like the worst they're going to say is go away, leave me alone. Yeah. Although you'd be surprised how often, and I find that I've photographed people and I've actually kind of quote unquote made their day. Like, you don't know, but especially there's people out there that weeks can go by without talking to someone, because if you're just in your own world and you don't have friends or whatever, so you actually showing interest in that person and taking the time out to photograph that person. That's why, yes, I have photographed celebrities, I still want to do it because it's work. But at the same time, if it's Kim Kardashian versus this strange little man up the street, I'll probably want to shoot the strange little man, because I'll have more to talk to him about and be more interested, and he'll probably give me the truer self than I would get from some reality star or celebrity. They're going to give you what they want to project. Whereas the reason I'm a photographer is to have that human interaction and connection. And even if it's, I'm often asked, do you keep in touch with everyone you photograph? It's like, hell no, I can't. How can you keep in touch? Like, I meet so many people in a day, in a week, in a year. I try to. And if people email me, I always respond. And depending on the person, if I have I have people that I definitely stay friends with, but sometimes the connection is just for that moment, but it doesn't mean that it was just to get the picture. But life is fleeting.
That's awesome. Thank you, Naomi, so much for your time. It was such a great conversation, a great opportunity to speak with you. All the best to you. Thanks so much.
Okay, Maggie says goodbye too.
Bye, Maggie.